what was your first impression or first contact with the fire service?
Oh, that's a hard question.
Yeah, I know, but it's a good one because it just starts off well.
Yeah, that must have been in my youth. I lived in a small village, 3,000 people. We had a very small fire department, and back in the days, they didn't have these beepers to call in firefighters when there was an emergency. So there was a huge siren mounted on City Hall, what is what's Community Hall, Municipality
Yeah.
Hall, something like that. And so the whole village knew when something was going on. And what in holidays all youngsters did, they jumped on their bikes, their step bikes, their push bikes, and they rode to the fire station, and then they tried to catch up with the fire engine which left. And since 3,000 people, it's a very small village.
Yeah.
Most of the time we could keep up. The streets are not very long, so we arrived almost simultaneously, like imagine 20, 30, 40 youngsters on bikes arriving with the fire service. And I remember some fires from back in the days. I must have been 10 or 12 or 14. And I kind of liked that. That was my first contact with the fire service.
So did you decide then that I'm going to be a fireman?
Oh, no. At that age, from that age on, until I decided I want to be a fireman, I wanted to be plenty of things. A surgeon, I wanted to be in the military, I wanted to be in the anti-terrorism units of the police, that kind of stuff.
So, yeah, I want to be a truck driver. I want to be a truck driver for a really long time. But when was it that you kind of started getting the realization that, hey, maybe I should become like involved in the fire service? When was started that?
That's another story. It takes us back to January 1998.
Oh, there's a specific moment?
Yes, there's a specific moment.
Okay, wow.
In January 98, my parents and I, I'm 19 at the time, we are driving to Ghent, the city where I was studying, and I had an exam in the afternoon.
What were you studying?
I was studying in civil engineering.
Yeah, and why did you so, before you get on to move, why did you choose civil engineering?
I had to choose engineering first, and I wanted, so that takes us back to 96. I applied for the Royal Military Academy to become an officer in the army.
Yeah.
And I was rejected because of an injury at my shoulder I had a couple of months earlier. And then that was quite late in the decision process that I got my letter from the army that I was rejected. And then I had to choose something else. Engineering, there's some math, there's some science. I was pretty good at science and math. I liked it, kind of. Yeah. So I chose engineering. And then actually I wanted to do chemical engineering, but the guy we had in the first year for chemistry was an asshole.
An asshole or incompetent?
No, an asshole. He was not incompetent. He was an asshole. And I was pretty good in chemistry. I liked it. And so in the second part of the year, we had to do an oral exam. And he gave us 3 questions, and then we had to go back to our seats and answer them, and then come back to him to defend our answer. So I was done first of the whole class. I came to him. I'm a pretty straightforward guy. No, never a hidden agenda. Truth is on my face. So I'm there with a smile on my face. These are the answers, and I know they are correct. He looks at me, and he clearly wasn't pleased with my attitude. He said, okay, and gave me some extra questions. Now, that's normal. At the exam, if you have the main questions right, maybe you score 14 or 15, and then you get extra out of 20, and then you get extra questions to determine if you can get more.
Yeah.
So the 3 extra questions were harder. Took me some more time, but I could figure them out more or less. So I went back to him, still pretty happy, thought, hey, this is going well in the 16, 17 area. They looked at me, well, that's already less good. I will give you some more. And I thought, hey, whatever, this will be maybe for 17 or 18. but those got really hard questions, and I didn't do that well in those questions, which should be normal. And I came to him, and to my surprise, he gave me 3 more. And when I came back, it was nothing. Yeah, he says, "Well, now you're not laughing anymore, aren't you? I will give you a 10, which is just half."
Oh.
And that was a very good exam. And I thought, you fucking asshole. Yeah, a guy from I knew. The first semester there was a written exam, so then there's not an interaction with the teacher.
Yeah.
And he came to the seat on the oral exam, the second semester, and he looked him up. Huh. You scored 20 out of 20 in the written test at Christmas. Well, you won't do that twice. So he was an asshole. So I decided year after that we had to choose our specialization. And I thought, fuck this. I don't want to study with this guy. If he can't stand excellence, then this is not where I want to be. And then I said, well, they blow up bridges in the army. So I still wanted to go to the army. So I thought, well, civil engineering seemed like a thing. And I went into civil engineering. Now, back to my original story.
Yes, good. Thank you.
So we had an informatics exam that afternoon. So I was driving with my parents in a nice suit, because oral exams, you had to show up in a suit. And suddenly we're driving. It's not a highway, but kind of 2 lanes in every direction, divided by something in the middle. And suddenly my father stops. And I see some cars in front of us, but then it stops. It's empty. And I think, like, why does everybody stop? And I see people getting out of their cars, and I get out as well. And I see somebody laying in the middle of the road. And around him, there is a deck of cards, a map, some biros, as if he dropped from the sky. Yeah. And I had something like, well, what the fuck is this? And he was kind of injured, and I had some basic first aid as a kid. I was in the basic training program of the Red Cross, and I tried to help him. And he was whispering, "Is everybody okay in the bus?" And I was looking around me, and I thought, "There is no bus here, man. What are you talking about?" And he kept on whining about his bus and if everybody was fine. And then suddenly, I was trying to take care of him. Back in the days. It was the beginning of the cell phone, so somebody called, I didn't have any, but somebody called the fire department and the dispatch to send over an ambulance. And then somebody tapped on my shoulder. There is a bus lying in the ditch there. And a 50-person bus coach had stumbled over and was in the ditch there. So I got into the ditch with my nice shoes in the mud. My mom went, "Oh, bananas, hey, your shoes." And so it was a pretty big disaster with like 20 or 30 people pretty well injured. Then the fire service came and ambulances came. And that was my first real contact with the fire service. And I realized, hey, I want to do more with first aid. My skills are not good enough. And I still wanted to be in the army. The year before, I done a camp in our commander training center. They do such camps for youngsters who maybe want to be in the military. I had done 1 week there, and I was planning on doing parachute training in the upcoming summer. But I thought, hey, they offer a medical course as well in the army. Let's do this. And the guy who taught there, he was very charismatic, talking about ambulance driving. I thought, hey, that's nice. Let's see in the Red Cross if I can do that. So in Ghent, there was a Red Cross unit. I did some courses, and then I landed on the ambulance. But they don't do, actually, they transport sick people from hospitals to hospitals or from, it's not really the emergency, it's the level below. And one day, I'm doing some kind of an internship with them, and the telephone goes, we have to go to a fire. And I had something like, what the fuck, a fire? We're driving the ambulance. What shall we do at the fire? And the other guy answers, don't worry, it happens. If there has been a big fire, then the ambulance of the fire service has to go back to the station to do real emergency calls. And we'll replace them just in case a firefighter gets hurt. Okay. And we end in that site. It was a school for handicapped children with actually a board school. And the whole fucking place is on fire. The fire was not extinguished at all. The situation was completely out of control. They were trying to evacuate those handicapped children. Some of them were mentally handicapped, others were physically handicapped, so they lacked staff. It was an old building. Part of the roof came down. A tower on the roof came down, burning. I thought, this is fun. This looks like the real thing. And I saw these firefighters running on the floor, which was on fire with hoses. And I thought, hey, this is cool. If the army doesn't want me, maybe I have to do this. Yeah. And a couple of months later, I applied for the second time for the army, and they rejected me for the second time for another medical issue. And then I thought, well, I should become a firefighter. Long story, isn't it?
Yes. It's interesting. A lot of people I talk to, and like this, and the talks I do like this on video, but also outside, the most passionate people are often, I would say, not the ones who wanted to become firemen from early age. They for some reason happened to join the fire service later on.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's important or not, but I find it to be interesting to see that. I mean, I never wanted to join the fire service until I was 20. Oh, can you join the fire service? That seems fun. That seemed to be a very common story. It's not, I wanted to be a fireman since I was 6 years old and went on that path.
22. I was 22 when I decided this is what I want to do. And then first I became a volunteer, and only afterwards I became a career firefighter.
Yeah. So what happened? So when you said you joined the volunteer, so what was the process of getting hired for the volunteer fire station?
You had to wait for vacancies.
Yeah.
And then after, I think, a year and a half, passed my decision, I want to do this. 2 vacancies were open, and you had to do an exam, which was a written test and sports tests. And there were 3 or 4 candidates for the 2 places. And actually, the selection process wasn't good. I mean, I had to write some kind of paper about what does 9/11 teaches us. We're talking 2002.
Yeah.
Oh, 2001, actually, the exam. So shortly after 9/11, I had to write that paper. But I had done general education in secondary school. I had done an engineering degree. So writing, I was pretty good at writing.
Yeah.
2 of the other guys didn't, or I think all the other guys didn't have higher education. So I was advantaged in the text, and so I got in.
Going back to the selection process. Okay, so it might not be very good, the selection process. Now, when you got in, do you remember the basic training you got related to firefighting, not the other parts of it?
The basic training we got was very poor. It had no live fire component. It was only 90 hours, so that's 2 weeks and a half.
Yeah.
For all the topics. It was very poor basic training at the time in Belgium.
What was that? You would say was that indicative of how generally the volunteer service training was, or was that just where you were?
It wasn't any better for the career guys. We have the same basic training for all firefighters, regardless whether they are professional or volunteer guys.
So that was 2.5 weeks for a professional firefighter too?
Yeah. Well, most big departments added their own components to it.
Yeah. But the basic training.
But in smaller departments, that was a hassle.
So what was the thought process behind it being that short? Was that a national decision, or was it just happened by tradition, or what was was there a conscious choice that 2.5 weeks seems to be a good idea, or it's just?
I don't know. That was legislation at the time.
There was a national legislation saying that this is sort of.
Yeah, it was 90 hours to become a firefighter, then 80 more hours for the level above, corporal, which is an army rank, then 70 more hours for sergeant, which is the commander of a crew of an engine, 100 more hours to become what the Americans call a captain, and then 170 more hours to become a battalion chief. So all the training programs were really limited.
Yeah. So again, do you think that was there a lack of knowledge? If we don't talk only the firefighting part, let's just skip the rest. They're not important. No, but if we only look at the firefighting part, like, was there a lack of? Would you describe it as a lack of knowledge within the system to know that we don't know what we don't know?
Yeah, I guess, and a lack of being critical and self-aware, a lack of reflection.
Because I see it as a, like, if you see this trends going different countries and so on. I look at Sweden, and I look at it like you look at periods in history, and I would contribute one of the major things happening in certain eras in history would be that, like, there's this constant regurgitation of old information, and it kind of spirals down, get watered down, maybe goes in the wrong direction, and there's just some individual or some individuals that go like, what the fuck, and trying to push it up again, and then it seemed to happen again. It seemed to decline again when that person or persons run out of system. It seemed to be extremely personal dependent. Like, it's not, the system by itself seems very fragile.
Yeah.
Would that be a resemblance that you think is accurate, or would you say that that's?
Well, I think definitely the part of going up, it's accurate.
Yeah.
In Belgium, in the past 20 years, the firefighter education was upped a lot. I think we were one of the worst in the world. I think we're at the front of the pack, not the best, but definitely at the front of the pack.
Yeah. So when you started then and you had 2.5 weeks, how long did it take you before you started questioning, like, hey, what am I doing? Or was there sort of a wake-up call, or was it a gradual process before you said, like, this is not good enough?
Yeah, it was a gradual process. There was not a wake-up call. Pretty fast, actually, I started questioning stuff. I had something like, this is really not good. And again, I refer to that engineering degree.
Yeah.
I had studied 4 years to have that engineering degree with lots of math and chemistry and material science. So I noticed pretty fast that in the fire service, they were cutting corners, telling stuff which is right sometimes, but also sometimes not. And I knew from my engineering background that if you do this, you'll end up in trouble.
Yeah.
And I saw, for example, we were also not practicing well. The quality of our practices were really low. And I was shocked. And then I started making suggestions, and they really weren't well received. There was that hierarchy, and I was just a junior firefighter. What the hell do you know? And I had something like, well, I don't know that much, but you don't either. You don't know what you're doing. And the quality of our work is sometimes very poor.
So how would you like, what did you find any way to show that the quality of work was low, or was it just anecdotally, meaning your experiences saying that I think the work is poor?
Well, it's anecdotal. So at the time, we had a very popular website in Flanders, which was sort of some kind of discussion forum, which discussed the emergency services, and clusterfucks all over the place. I mean, small fires which turned into big fires, fires where there was way more water damage than fire damage. They were all over the place. People who clearly didn't know what they were doing. And then sometimes it's very obvious. I mean, sometimes at some places there were very competent people. I remember of a fire close to where I lived, and they were fighting the fire for 3 or 4 hours. And on the radio, it was a clusterfuck. And nearby, there was a town which had 30 career guys with 6 of them on duty, something like that. and also one senior officer, a battalion chief, responding from home. But they called him in, and they asked him, have a listen to that radio traffic. And after a while, he said, "Fuck this," and he took an engine and he went there. That was outside of his jurisdiction, and the commander of that fire department said, "What are you doing? We're coming to help." 15 minutes later, that fire was out. They were fighting it for 3 or 4 hours. Things kept on getting worse. There was no major improvement. It was a clusterfuck. And then competent guys go in, and 15 minutes later, okay, you can now do overhaul, we'll go home. And that's clearly a lack of competence. And yeah.
But how do you like if you go to your superior and say, you know, I've looked at forums and I think that we
that
suck.
doesn't work.
We suck. Like, how did you? No, that's my experience too. Like, and it doesn't matter. I mean, Belgium is much more hierarchical than Sweden. Sweden is like much more anarchy and so on. But it still doesn't work because it's people. Like, you can't go to a person because everyone thinks that their self are very competent. Like, doesn't matter what level you are. You think you're competent. Like, you think you're good. And if someone comes and they don't have enormous amount of respect with them, meaning that if someone tells you like you're doing it wrong, and if I don't have data or something to show that that's actually true, it's all opinion based. And if I don't respect your opinion, you go like, yeah, that's your opinion, but you're wrong. So I mean, it doesn't matter if you're Sweden or Belgium. I get the same. Like, when I started questioning things, I would say it's the same thing. Like, who are you to question me? Like, I've been doing this for 20 years. I know what I'm doing. And again, it's not that they're bad people. They want to do good. It's just that they don't know what they don't know. Which is the same with me. If someone comes to me and say, "Hey, Lars, I think you're wrong," I go like, "Yeah, who are you to sell me? I'm the baddest motherfucker in the world. Like, I'm the shit. Like, I know traditionally I've been wrong, but now I'm perfect." So I mean, it's like you're constantly fighting that battle of trying to stay humble, in the sense that, maybe I'm wrong now also. But like, so that, I think that's the same in Sweden as it was in Belgium. Like, it's hard to get your message across. But so you started realizing that, hey, we need to do something better. Was that before or after you joined the professional fire brigade?
That was already before.
That was before. So when you started, did you have a hope that it would be better when you joined the professional side? Or in lack of other word, full-time side?
Yeah, when I became a career firefighter, I was joining Brussels, our capital, and I thought, these guys are going to be the best. This training program is going to be awesome.
Yeah, and that was not the case. Or?
Well, it was surely a lot better than what we had as a volunteer. Yeah. So in Brussels, we got 2 months of training on top of that package of 2.5 weeks, and we did some pretty interesting and cool stuff. It was way better. Still lots of room for improvement, and it's not what we have now, but it was way better.
So when you joined Brussels, then you joined as a junior firefighter, or did you join at a different rank?
No, I joined as a recruit firefighter.
Yeah. So by then, when you joined, what year is this?
2004, 2 years later.
2004. So you joined 2004 in Brussels, and you had some doubts about the way of generally doing firefighting overall. When you've joined the professional side then, and you got the training there in terms of firefighting, were you like actively researching on your own out like in the world? Like were you reading books from other countries and so on?
Books not that much, but the internet. The internet was existing at the time already, and I was reading on the internet. I was reading a lot on firetactics.com of Paul Grimwood. So yeah.
But you hadn't read like a 3D Firefighter or Euro Firefighter?
No, I haven't.
So
I wasn't aware of those books. The only name I knew was Paul Grimwood. I know he was the real thing.
So when you started that journey, like What would you say were the driving forces that drove you to like internationally looking at things how they're done? What was?
Okay, so I became a battalion chief. So in Belgium, you can enter the ranks as a firefighter or as a battalion chief. Like in the army and the military, you can also join officer school and then you become an officer. You have the same thing in the fire service. So a little 3 years later, that was 2006. I joined again. So I resigned as a firefighter and I entered Brussels again as a senior officer. And that was also the beginning of live fire training. I mean, decent live fire training in Belgium. And the guys in Antwerp were the first to have it. And a couple of Brussels guys were sent to Antwerp to do that training, and I could go.
Was that by chance? Was that by chance, or did you fight your way in?
Because I had a star on my shoulders, and I was interested in the topic. And I was a senior officer. I was a young senior officer, and they wanted to give me chances to develop myself. So I got to go.
Why were you that interested by then? Was it?
Well, I'm somebody who is always interested in learning extra stuff. So when there's an opportunity to learn something, I will also be the first to apply. So I went to that training, and one of the instructors, American rank would be captain in Antwerp, second biggest city in Belgium, and they have a very, very good, they're probably the best fire department in the country. He had 3D firefighting with him, and he showed it to another instructor. And I thought, hey, I need that book, and I bought the book. And then suddenly I knew the names McDonough, Hartin, and Sean Raffel. And I discovered Ed's website, cfbtus.com, where at the time he published once or twice a week. He published a piece, very interesting. Ed is very, very knowledgeable, not only the practical stuff, but also the theory side of it. He dares using formulas to explain his stuff. And I like that a lot since I'm an engineer and I love math. This learned me a lot of stuff. And then it brings us back to 2009. In 2009, a course was planned in Germany with Jürgen Ernst. The course was called 3D Firefighting, and the idea was that 4 authors would come. Now, then, shortly before the financial crisis started, which created some problems for Ed and for Paul, who couldn't make it, but John and Sean came together with Peter McBride, a guy from Ottawa. And the course was awesome. I mean, that was really the level I was searching for.
Yeah.
And the amount of knowledge these three guys had, that was wow. I mean, why can't this be our basic training?
Yeah.
And I remember I went there with Hein Vandenberg from Kortrijk, Maurice Grimaud, who was a colleague from me in Brussels, and Geert Piefer, who was also from Kortrijk.
Yeah.
And so the 4 of us, we went there, and we had the idea that we would be the juniors in the room. It was like a group of 20, 30 people. We thought we will be the ones who know the least. But that didn't really turn out to be the case. We were already above average.
Yeah.
And we were really enthusiastic. Every evening we were discussing on how we would apply stuff in Belgium. And by the 3rd or the 4th day, we had enough courage to ask John or Sean or Peter, I don't know who it was anymore, would you come and sit with us, and could we exchange some stuff about how we would like to apply this in Belgium? And we didn't know them at the time. Yeah. So they asked me, of course, of course we will do that. And I thought, why? Wow, they want to talk to us.
These superheroes.
The superheroes. I get to talk to superheroes. They're at my table.
Yeah.
And these guys turned out to be very nice. And the year after that, Peter was organizing the International Fire Instructors Workshop in Canada, in Ottawa, and he invited us. And I thought I will never get to go there. And my colleague Maurice, he went to our boss, Colonel, asking, and he said, "Yeah, why not go?" And so we were authorized to go on a mission, how is it called in Brussels, and we went to Canada. And a couple of weeks before, I had a Skype call with Peter McBride, the organizer. He said, "Well, I would like you to present something in Canada." Me? You want me to present something? I can't teach you anything. Yeah, still, I want you to present something, like half an hour. So I presented the case that happened in Belgium where it was some kind of a fierce backdraft. And that turned out to be a success. And that was my first international presentation.
So what was it, if you look at the course that you attended in Antwerp and the first one, and you said, well, this is really good compared to what you had in Brussels, if I'm correct. So how did that course in Antwerp differ towards the course you did with Shane and McDonough and McBride?
The course in Antwerp was only one day. It was very hot. In retrospect, it was very hot. They showed us a backdraft. They had a backdraft prop, and they showed us very spectacular. But there was a limited theory aspect to it, only an hour and a half, which was interesting because then I could discuss with people who were also studying this topic. I was reading online, had gathered some concepts, but I didn't understand all of it, and now I could exchange with people who are on the same route. But the practice was maybe too much in one day and too hot, not enough debriefings, not enough time to ask questions. But it was way better than everybody else was doing at the time in Belgium. They were way ahead at the time.
So what do you think are the key things that, in terms of understanding or putting in the right context, that you got when you went to the course with Jürgen Ernst?
Well, in that course, there was way more theory. It was 5 days. That's one thing, with lots of group discussions. And we had a group full of fire enthusiasts. So not only the instructors were teaching us, but there was also learning happening in the group. There was guys from Belgium, from France, from Germany, from Switzerland. Who else was there? I'm thinking who else was there. I should look at Croatia. I think there were some Croatians. It was kind of interesting. So there was also, how do people do things different in another country? And then after every practical session, there was a long debriefing about what does this mean? What can we learn from this? And we had different fire props. We had difficult cold evolutions. And also some of the theory parts were new. I mean, Peter McBride gave a lecture about wind-driven fires. But wind-driven fires were very, very new at the time. There was very little documentation available. I mean, NIST only just concluded its research about it. So, was amazing on multiple levels. I heard about reading the fire, but now the guy who invented it discussed his model and explained the ins and the outs. That was at a level way, way higher. And then John, he was so good on the nozzle. I'd never seen somebody, and I still haven't seen somebody who is as good with the nozzle as John McDonough. And the way he taught was so calm. In Belgium, we had a style of teaching which was close to the military, yelling at people, shouting at them. And John was teaching very calmly. And if somebody made a mistake, that's okay. We're here to make mistakes and to learn from them. It was a completely different teaching style. The combination of all these different elements, a good theory, different ways of teaching, practical elements, new knowledge, more in-depth, that was something I never had before.
So going back to those, let's go before that course. Describe sort of, if you have let's say we have started with a single residential house, like a one-story building, the simple one, and you arrive to a fire coming out of B-side window, and maybe a bedroom on fire. The Brussels, in that case, got a fire call. First engine arrives. Describe sort of roughly how would a fire attack or an incident have looked like back then when they arrived, if you're able to generalize.
Well, they would kick in the front door and they would go in with a high pressure booster line.
Would they secure a hydrant before they do that?
No, that will be directly afterwards.
Would there be an officer doing like a 360 and before the same time?
In the Brussels context, there is no 360s because it's in 99.99% of cases it's not possible.
Yeah, you can't.
Yeah. I've been working in Brussels 16 years, and I had 2 cases in which I could do that.
But like you can only was there? I mean, the goal of the 360 is not, of course, to do a 360 just because to do a 360 is just like, is there more to this than we can see? Yeah. Is there inlets and outlets and so on?
But was there nothing at all.
Was there like a thought of trying to establish that? Yeah.
Kick in the front door and go in with the booster line.
Yeah, and hope.
Typically, that booster line would be a jet.
Yeah. Oh, that would be a straight stream?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I didn't know that. So you went in, and was there like spring water and smoke, like cooling smoke? Nothing at all. It was hold your water until you saw flame. Flames. or
yeah.
And if you saw flame, you try to shoot at the flame.
Yeah.
Wet stuff on the red stuff.
Yeah.
Until there's no more red stuff. Was there any concept of door control?
Nope.
Was there a conscious choice to go in and go for fire attack, or go for search and rescue?
Well, we were taught to do search and rescue first, but in practice, most of the time people took the fire first.
Yeah.
Just because they liked it.
Because they liked it, it just felt more natural?
I think it was because it's way more fun to fight fires than search for victims, right?
Well, I would definitely argue that that's true.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, so there wasn't any repercussion if people did that? There wasn't part of like the evaluation process? Why did you pick that?
There was no evaluation process, so it didn't really matter. But I do remember in the years after that, and even prior to that, I was having lots of discussions with guys. We have to hit the fire first. Forget the idea that rescue comes first.
Yeah.
And then there were very fierce debates. Yeah, rescue comes first, and you're wrong, and blah 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 blah. Yeah. But on the fire ground, typically they were attacking the fire first.
When did you? I want to go back to that standard way of attacking fire back then. But when did you first have thoughts about, and why do you have thoughts about, like, should we do rescue first or should we do fire attack first? Like,
I think that was that period, maybe 2007, 2008. I was reading, there was an influential French guy, Jean-Louis Lamberlet, who had good ideas, but some of his science was bogus. But he had some good concepts, and he was an excellent instructor. And I did a course with him, and that gave me some more insight. In fact, hey, this doesn't make any sense. Fire is dangerous. We should put it out. That was before I went to the course with John and Sean and Peter.
So I've asked you this before. I didn't get an answer. At least I did. You didn't know back then. But the story of the cornfield, which John says is from a Belgian fire instructor.
Well, it's actually a French one. I heard it first from Jean-Louis Lamberlet, the guy I cited before. Yeah. He told me the story first.
So it's from Lamberlet? You think it's the?
I don't know if he invented it, but I heard it first from him. That's what I mean. He was an excellent instructor. I loved being in his classroom.
Yeah.
The problem he had is not all what he instructed was correct.
Yeah.
Science-wise, it was not so very good. And then when you tried to correct him, then he became very angry. He was not open. But he was a very, very good instructor. He was, if you were in his class, you were paying attention.
Yeah.
His way of teaching was also very well.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I remember also when, back in the day when internet was starting to really have a big impact on collaborations and getting information, Karel Lambert was a big part of that.
Yeah.
But he vanished when
he's his own worst enemy. I mean, if you think you're 100% correct and you become very aggressive, people point out that it's not true, then you will end up isolating yourself, and this is what happened. I know. I disappeared. I would have loved to. That's sad.
At least now, I don't remember. Also, I think I ended up. I don't really remember. I think I ended up in some kind of discussion with him also, where he said, "Well, F you," and then
he became really nasty, and that's
I think it was something.
It's sad because he was a very good instructor and he meant well. His intentions were well. He intended to improve the fire service and to save firefighters' lives. It was all very positive and very good, actually.
Now I would love to sit in his class once, because I've heard, like you say, I've heard from a lot of people that he's an excellent instructor. That I would love to learn from what he does. But now going back, so that is an interesting. I mean, the concept of the problem of getting people to understand the difference between the objective rescue and the task rescue, which is two different things. Like objective might be to save people, but to do that we actually do fire attack first. To get that difference across, I think the analogy with the cornfield is just superb. Like it really drives home that there's a difference. So that it's interesting that you got that before you went to John, because John, I don't know back then if he was was it cemented in John's thoughts that first crew does fire attack? Was that part of it? It was cemented.
Yeah.
Because when I went to, it was Creation 2011 when the first time I heard John and Raphael, I think it was 2011 when the first time I heard John and Shan, the full course, not just reading books and so on. I know that it was interesting.
I was there as well. You remember?
Yes. Well, yeah, but you were 2011. So that's when he made a reference, like, well, when I was in Sweden, they didn't do fire attack first. They went in like right hand or left hand in the wall and did search, which is and was true that Sweden did. Sweden had not. I mean, we're generalizing here, but Sweden had not had that discussion with itself. There's a difference between the objective rescue and the task of doing search and rescue. So Swedish was like, if you go in, you go right or left side in the wall, or if you see the fire first, put some water on it, but the objective is to find the people. So I found that very interesting to have that discussion, because that was one of the things that for me was like, maybe we're not as good as we think we are in Sweden. Like, which is very important in the development process of, hey, I need to learn. Maybe we're not the shining bright beacon in the sun. there might be spots here and there to polish.
Definitely were at one point in history.
Well, I think that Sweden. I mean, Sweden was definitely Sweden. It's Sweden did. As a country, yes, but we had individuals that, like Master Sander and Giselson, and other individuals that took the banner and led Sweden in that direction, like Belgium has, for instance, I'm not
alone.
No, not at all. No, like Hein and so on, and Maurice and so on. But like there's a group of people, and around the Rosander and Giselson, there was a lot of people that were influenced by them and helped to push it because they couldn't do it alone. It's impossible to do it alone. You have to have backup and people. But you can always find and center, if you talk to people, it tends to lead to a certain point. And in Sweden back then, it led to Giselson. That was the the hub where everything came from in terms of changing. And then Rosander was an integral part of getting that across, and then other people. But you find that Sweden back then did some great stuff in terms of, I would say now my take on it, taking things that were sort of known, but it wasn't implemented. Like a lot of things from the United States about how water works, and Lloyd Lehman and so on, about the concept of steam blankets and how steam works and so on. A lot of that, the knowledge was there, but it wasn't implemented in the sense that maybe we should do gas cooling, in the sense that then came on putting small droplets up in the gas layer and so on. The theory was there. I mean, the theory of droplet size and so on. I mean, that was known in the 40s and 30s. Like the Master Center just copied 0.3 droplets from a German book. It's always the Germans.
Yeah, that's Heinrich in the 60s.
Yeah, Wasser als Löschmittel. Oh, there you go. So I mean, so there was they were the ones who questioned things, and they were the ones in Swedish context that said, this is not good enough, we need to do something better. And they put it, what I say was the genius of them, they put it into firefighter terminology, they put it into context of real firefighting, they put the theories into a practical sense, they found ways of teaching that in a way that firefighters understood and so on. That was the real genius, I would say, rather than they didn't necessarily create the information, but they were certainly the ones who made it possible to use it. They were the science communicators and the instructors, and they changed Sweden for good or bad, and that was the starting point for a lot of other countries, of course, to doing that transition of just thinking as smoke as fuel and doing door control and cooling the smoke and how you can do that and so on. But that didn't mean it was perfect. In a sense, like they don't like if you do search and rescue or fire attack first, that wasn't part of the equation, like. So there's lots of gaps there, I would say, that could have been better in hindsight.
In hindsight, it's always easy.
Oh, it's in hindsight, I'm pretty stupid. Because I've had some bad thoughts in my brain that I for some reason thought were excellent thoughts at some point. So yes, in hindsight, everything is easy. Yeah, but going back to the standard fire attack. So you say kick the door in, go in. At least on paper, rescue was, because rescue people is our primary objective. That was sort of do search and rescue first. But in practice, a lot of people went for fire attack, maybe because it was fun, or just maybe because it feels more natural. I would say, like, if you see fire, put some water on it. It's a very natural feeling. Also, if you practice like that, you put water on it. Don't put water on smoke. Put water on flames. Do it with a booster line. Now, what was if you go back to that time and you did that, what did you experience, or at that point, like this is not right, like what we need to change, not just what we know, like the theory. What was the behaviors you thought back then was like, maybe we should do this?
Well, one of the things I remember seeing a fire attack with a straight stream. It was a large body of flames, and they were attacking it with a straight stream. And I thought, hey, if you now go to spray, there will be droplets, and the heat-water interaction will be way more effective.
Yeah.
How come I am the only one to see this? Why don't you see this by yourself, that you're not very effective? That was one thing. And then
had you read 3D Firetech then, or was it before that? Had you read 3D Firetech or?
Yeah, I guess so. Man, no, it was before. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, I read Ed Hartin's work online about droplets and all. Yeah. I was like, hey, this makes sense. This is not okay.
Yeah. And that was one thing. That was one thing. Yeah. Was something else the pottery? Was it? Was what? Back then, I don't really remember. Did Ed Harden and Grimberg talk about like the concept of door control or closing the door back then too? Did they write about that?
I don't know. I can't remember. I wasn't. It was only after I think Steve Kerber's work that he published in 2009, 2010. The first UL study that showed that opening the door is ventilation, that I realized we had to limit that.
Because I think
maybe that Ed or Paul wrote before that, but it didn't enter my thought process.
For me, it's different because door control was implemented in Sweden. Like, I've never heard anyone say that they haven't done it. Like, regardless how long you trace it 70, 80 years ago. I mean, forever. And I think that was a problem because when, for instance, Sweden started exporting the knowledge about gas cooling and so on, there was a lot of problems with that in terms of how they taught and exported that knowledge. And you could debate what the responsibility of the sender or the recipient of the information who's responsible for making it correct. But when gas cooling was taught, and limit the amount of oxygen, cool the gases, the connection to door control wasn't well taught. Like, you should close the door after you go in, because if you don't do that, you have way too high velocities of air going out, and if you do short pulses, all the steam goes out the door behind you, and that connection wasn't there. So a lot of countries went home and took the gas cooling part, but they didn't take the door control part. So they were doing pulsing in small volumes, and most of the times it works anyway. But if the velocity was too high, the steam just went out, and you have very poor effect. And I think that was, I would say, a big failure in the different people who taught other countries about the concept of gas cooling. And it was a sort of the way we're doing it with shorter pulses is sort of deeply connected to the concept of door control.
Okay.
And that wasn't that. I don't think that was.
No.
That wasn't part of it.
The pulses came, but the door control did not.
Yeah. And I think that's a huge. It doesn't, not just because it limits the amount of fire. It just, again, slows down the velocity of the air currents, which makes the steam stay there for longer periods of time. So, but to be and to explain that, I think that it was. I haven't found an answer to this, but there's only, to me, two possible answers. Either it was so natural for the fire instructors in Sweden that you should close the door that he didn't even say it.
Yeah.
Like, sort of, it was so natural that it was not part of, we're only teaching you about gas cooling. This is, why wouldn't you close the door? Or two, they themselves have not made that connection. I think that's the truth. I think that they limit the amount of oxygen to the fire, and that goes back way in Sweden, like, limit the amount of that. And then you do gas cooling. And I don't think they made a connection that the one is very important to the other. I think that's the answer. So I think you close the door to reduce oxygen, and you cool gases to make them not flammable. But those two concepts are not tied together. And when I went to, for instance, Croatia, I didn't think about it that I hadn't formalized that problem or thoughts when I went to Croatia, for instance. But it afterwards, when I started thinking about like the concept of door control, the concept of door procedure was taught. You should, pulse and close and pulse, and then when you see improvements, you go in. But then after that point, the door became irrelevant. Like it wasn't when John and Chan and the students went in. If the door was closed or open behind the students, that was not part of the teaching at all. There wasn't the universe of the door being controlled was not part of it.
No.
And that struck me probably like a half a year later when I started thinking about it. When I watched the videos like a couple of times, go like door procedure, and during that process, never door control. But again, then even when I realized that, I hadn't formalized why is that. Like, what's the reason for that? And why am I poor at teaching that? And so on. It took me a lot of time to figure out, like, sort of, this is how this might be the reason for that. And to be fair, when you look at it, like, when I saw videos about how the steam flows away when you open the door and so on, and you see those air currents, if I didn't have a thermal imager, I wouldn't have thought about it.
Yeah.
Like, because you can thermal image, you can visualize that cooling effect and you can see it flowing away. But if you don't have a thermal imager, you don't see that. So you like have to like theoretically figure it out that has to be the case. But if you don't have a thermal imager, you call go like, yeah, of course, if I put it up there, it stays there. Go like, no, no, not at all. Or it might be if you're not in a flow, like in the air current state. Oh, well, that's just interesting. But so the concept of door control wasn't there. Now, if you like you said, what did you have a problem then? Going back again to that original fire attack, if you want to call it, did you have problems with flashovers and backdrafts? Was that like sort of the thing that happened? And
well, it didn't happen that much. It's not so common, but they weren't really aware of that. We were taught about flashover and backdraft, but it wasn't connected to fire attack.
Was there like a? There has to be like. Sometimes it happened like for someone, so that it has been. Was there any like conscious approach to saying like, how can we prevent this and how can we anticipate that? Or it was it a classical of, it's sort of just something that happens to you and bad luck if it happens to you?
Yeah, I don't know if I would formulate it like that, but it wasn't on our radar. Yeah. It was some concept which was in the book, but
it never happens in real life.
Not that, but there was no focus on it.
Yeah. Now, do you think that there was do you think flashovers and backdrafts became more common, and that's why there was like a need for changing the way you do operations? Or was it just that with the internet and with the information coming in, the few amount of flashovers and backdrafts that existed in the world and people telling about it sort of get the sense of it's happening more? Do you get my point?
Yeah, I think the main thing is that fire has accelerated. Another piece of Steve Kerber's work. Mm. So time to flash over in the 50s, half an hour. Time to flash over now, roughly 3 minutes in the right conditions. Time used to be a slow-moving Volkswagen, and now it's a Ferrari. And that's a different environment. And it just happens faster, and things go south faster if they go south. There's more energy in the fire than there is before. And that's a problem which creates danger for us, more risk on fire propagation, and that's why we needed to change. I don't think it's something in the perception. I think it's a real thing. Fire has changed. It's not the fire of 50 years ago anymore.
So do you think... Give me a second. I need to change... I need to fix my light here. So with the introduction of plastics in the, it started in the 50s, 60s, and of course exploded sort of in the 70s and 80s. That was the start in Sweden. I mean, that was, at least when you talk to Rosander, I didn't get a chance to talk to Giesensson before he died. I'm really sorry about that. But talk to them. I mean, it was the perceived, but also I would say data-driven conclusion that there's something has happened, like in the 80s and sort of the early 90s. That change might have happened faster in Sweden because of politics. I mean, if you ask Rosander, his interpretation was that, well, there was a political ambition in the 80s to build 1 million new homes in Sweden. Like it was huge development done to build cheap, affordable housing. So in a population of like 6 or 7 million people, and build 1 million new houses, sort of 1 million new homes, is like a huge improvement, expansion. And all those houses need to be filled with cheap furniture, and that was the place when IKEA was started. But IKEA was like one of the companies started to. I mean, all those homes need to have furniture, and to be able to produce cheap furniture with not just real wood but laminated wood and synthetics was much easier. It was you had cheaper furniture, lighter weight, but burns more. So it might be that the politics in Sweden pushed that change to happen faster in Sweden. Like the environment may have changed faster in Sweden because sort of more faster development on a shorter period of time. Mm-hmm. Which may have, for political reasons, that change of rapidly expanding housing and furniture caused it to happen later in Sweden. So Rosander used to describe it like a victim of the circumstances, meaning that one reason for Sweden being faster at adopting those type of changes was simply because the fires look different in Sweden than Belgium. I don't know if that's the case.
Probably it did at the time. By now, IKEA is all around the world, and I think
yes, everything is made by IKEA or something similar. I mean, there's multiple brands like they're all synthetics and laminated. If you go into a house now, like if I look around, like I see nothing made of like pure wood. Like my table in the dining area upstairs, like that's made of wood, like real wood. Like everything else is just laminated with like different types of wood-like materials that burn entirely different than real wood. It's still not synthetics, but it still burns entirely different because it's just less dense. So it burns much faster. And then on top of that, you have everything that's made of synthetics and different fossil fuels. So going back to again the original your fire tech. You went to Antwerp, and your visit to Antwerp, and did that change anything in terms of how you would change the behavior on the fire ground? Or was that just like...
Yeah, it would. It especially gave me an idea on how to teach that differently. You got to see gas cooling not only in theory, but with real smoke.
Yeah.
And I thought we need to do this too. Yeah. But it would take me another 10 years easily to make it an accepted idea to cool the gases. And still now we're still not doing it as much as I wanted it. I would want to do.
Well, I think that most countries struggle with that.
Yeah.
It's simply because most firefighters, experience-wise, get away with not cooling the smoke so often. Yeah. So it's just like, well, most of the times I don't have to, so why should I?
Yeah.
Like, you don't know how close you are to everything going to flames.
Yeah.
Because you can't
That's it, and most firefighters don't realize that, and most of them don't want to think about it because it's hard thinking. And it's complex and abstract. Yeah. And they're stubborn. They don't want to do what they've been told either. They say, yeah, you're right. But then they don't do it.
Well, they're human, and humans know best.
Yeah, I've been struggling with this for a decade by now, because I'm firmly convinced of the fact that sooner or later somebody will get seriously hurt or even die because our methods are not what they should be.
Yeah.
It's not that they have to do what I tell them to do. I just want them to be safe and effective.
Yeah.
And sometimes I see stuff that I think, oh, we got lucky here. And I don't want to be lucky. I want to be effective, and I want that our guys know what they're doing. So it's not they survive by pure luck. No, they survive because they are professionals and they have mastered their craft.
I have a problem because it's sort of like I have two brains. I have one brain that says, if I stand on an exercise and I see a drill, or if I go to a fire or I see on YouTube, I go like, this looks like awful. If they don't look what they're doing, I'm happy that they have their breathing apparatus on the right side of their face, like it's not back here. The water's not pressurized. And I go like, emergency. I'm so like, why aren't people dying in 20 or 30 at the time? And then on my right brain, I go look at statistics and data. I look at like fire goes out, and like there's a bunch of fires, and no, the danger's not that bad, and firefighters not being killed. Like Sweden has a very good track record of not being killed, at least by like fire, like fire. We had a firefighter killed sadly 2 years ago or 1 year ago, but it was like he was standing outside and got the edge of the roof in his head. During like sort of like he shouldn't even be in there because nothing to say. The house was collapsing and he got it in the head. So it was killed by firefighting, but I wouldn't describe it as like being killed in doing interior firefighting or because of lack of knowledge about fire behavior. But anyway, so you have this right brain goes, well, it sort of looks okay. We get a system that seems to work, and then the left brain goes like, every time I see a fire attack, I go like, emergency, we need to correct this, and I don't know which one is right. Like both of them seem to be correct.
I think in Brussels, in my jurisdiction, things have improved a lot. Yeah. They still use the high pressure booster line way more than I would want to.
Yeah.
But our guys are way more knowledgeable now than when I joined the ranks. They are making tactical decisions, tactical considerations. They have way more knowledge about all the stuff that can go wrong.
But can you see that? Could you prove that on data, or is that just purely anecdotal? It just feels like
it's too early to say so. If let's say from in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, you could say, but it's very limited data, but you could say on average we killed a firefighter every 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While doing firefighting or overall.
In general. Yeah. And in the past 12 years now, we didn't kill a firefighter anymore. So it seems like we have less dead firefighters. But why am I expressing it in such a cautious manner? Because there is something like the law of the small numbers.
Yeah.
And let's say if in 10 or 20 years from now we still haven't killed a firefighter in a fire, then I think you could say that we made progress, that something has changed.
Yeah. If you look at entire Belgium to get a greater sample, do you think
same thing there, but also low numbers, but the number of dead firefighters has decreased.
Yeah.
So you used to kill plenty of firefighters.
Yeah. And that is, I mean, in Sweden, you could make an argument also, like with the adoption of more knowledge and gas cooling and so on. In the 90s, we went from killing some firefighters at a regular interval to none or a very small number, depending on how you look at it. Now, one side of my brain goes, that's because we started doing live fire training and better education, and my right brain goes like, well, there's a lot of things that could contribute to that, like more risk-averse society or better building construction or something like that. But it's very hard to prove something, and that's my point. It's very hard to show.
An interesting case could be the UK.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the report of the Fire Brigades Union, where they look at firefighter casualties from, I think, 78 till somewhere in the 2000s?
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
And
they had very good progress when they started doing
live fire training.
Yeah, live fire training.
And then the progress went away when they stopped doing it.
So now they're in a decline again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that, and again, I think there's just this constant question: is correlation is not causation? But I mean, it is really hard. There seems to be a lot of evidence or data around the world that at least correlates with the increase in live fire training. And of course, if I look at my left brain, I say that's obvious. If we get more knowledge and better behavior, the outcome should not be just less dead firefighters, but also improved incidents. Like we become more effective. But also that if you try to measure effectiveness, it's so hard. Like how to measure property damage. Go okay, so let's say we per fire we cause less property damage. Well, that depends on how you calculate, and you have to take into account.
It's very difficult.
Yeah, it's so difficult. How much does it cost to build now versus then, and the insurance companies, their willingness to repair rather than replace, and so on. There's so many factors to start counting. Are we actually getting better? So you're just sort of stuck with, when I look quality control, you're sort of stuck with, well, I can't really justify things happening because of the outcome. I sort of have to value something because of to measure, if measure something if the firefighters know more, if they perform better on training, the outcome should be better on the fire ground. You measure the potential for doing something good, because you can't really measure if it's something good in the end.
Yeah.
So if you were to set up objective or sort of objective measurements and see that, well, now firefighters know more about water damage, now they know more about overhaul, now they know more about how to behave and so on, now they should be better. And that's sort of, I have to be good with that.
But it's anecdotal, but I see that on the fire grounds.
Yeah.
I see my firefighters being way more effective than what they were.
Yeah.
And back in the days, I had discussions with crew commanders on maybe we should do things differently, and then they had something like, what the fuck, what do you know? And now, more often than not, they are taking decisions I was going to take.
Yeah.
And they're making suggestions. I'm pretty happy with the direction in which we are moving. And it's an ongoing process. We have to keep on getting better, but still, we're making good progress.
So if we take, again, going back to that standard fire attack, if you compare to now, what would you say are the major difference in terms of behavior, not in terms of what they know and so on, in terms of actual behaviors, like a standard fire attack?
I think they are more aware of the situation. Before, they were doing whatever they did. They got kicked in the front door, went in with the hose reel, regardless of the environment around them.
Yeah.
If it was little smoke, little flames, lots of smoke, lots of flames, the answer was always the high-pressure booster line.
Yeah.
And they were not taking into account the situation around them. I think now they are. And that translates in more using a low-pressure line when it's a bigger incident to have a higher flow.
Yeah.
That translates in for smaller incidents, no more water supply and combination of fire attack and search and rescue.
Yeah.
Because they now know that they can deal with a smaller to medium-sized fire with the contents of the water tank on the engine.
Yeah.
So they have learned and mastered new concepts, what the Americans call transitional attack, what we call transitional attack, a combination of an exterior attack with an interior attack. That's also something we would never do in the past, but now we do.
What was the what would you describe the reason to be not doing transitional attack or exterior attack before?
Same thing all over the world. We believe that we would make things worse when we would throw water in from the outside. We believed it would push the fire inside.
So why looking at just Belgium, where does this come from?
I don't know.
But can't you find any like?
I don't know. I don't care. That's the past. I know it's not correct. There's only 24 hours in a day, and I choose them to spend them on progress, not on history.
Well, history is very important to understand.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But if you do all that, I already lack time for all the stuff I want to do. So I'm not busy with where does that come from. I don't know. Yeah. I don't care. Yeah. It has to change.
Yeah. So I would say, like, if you go to take the Sweden context, I don't think there was definitely an aware thing that don't put water in from the outside because you might steam the firefighters and so on. And a lot of anecdotal sense that was true, and I would say that is true if you do it incorrectly. Like if you could definitely steam the firefighters, and I think that's part of it, because if you do it incorrectly or so on, you could definitely steam the firefighters and victims and so on. So there was a lot of anecdotal evidence that you shouldn't put water in from the outside, but it was never to the point like in America, like it was a big no-no. It was just something that, well, just don't do that when firefighters inside. And since the firefighters are pretty much always inside from the get-go, you never do it. And since you sort of don't see the point of doing it, you don't train for it. And if you don't train for it, it falls away.
You won't do it.
It falls away as an option altogether. So in Sweden, at least in recent history, it was like fires had never, like in the basic training, it was probably mentioned that you could steam firefighters when I did basic training. But it was not the biggest reason why I never did like a transitional attack. Almost never, I would say. It was not because someone told me I couldn't. It was just simply because I never trained on it, so I never did it.
Yeah.
There was only one way to deal with the fire when I basically did basic training. It was to go to the closest door, go inside, and find the fire. Now that with the difference that we do gas cooling and door control, but like that's just how you did it. And I think that the Cobra which I mean, it's a different transitional attack with the piercing nozzle, but with the Cobra, the major difference with the Cobra was not high pressure water mist. It was not like good water through the wall. It was the major cultural problem of why shouldn't we go inside straight away, or why shouldn't we always deem that to be the fastest or best or safest way to go to fight the fire. So we had the Cobra discussion for 10 years before that was sort of accepted as, well, at least in some cases, putting water in from the outside was a good thing, not just because it made it safer or because it was more effective or it created less water damages. It allowed us to do ventilation. So when the transitional attack study came with straight streams, it was much easier for Sweden, I think, to adopt it because we sort of jumped over the cultural problem of doing it before we came to the actual technique. So I in Sweden, it was sort of like when the transition attack study, my experience was that firefighters just go like, okay. It was sort of like, it wasn't like, hold on a minute, like, you're fucking stupid. It was like, it was sort of, okay. Seems like a good idea, and like then we need to train on it, and then firefighters generally start training on it. And when people start training on it, they do it, and when they do it, they see that it works, and when it works, they keep doing it. So for my experience on that was just it was not even an issue. Like in America, they're still having huge debates about transitional attack, and it's sort of a different world.
Yeah, it is.
Compared to Sweden, like it was like, okay. I don't know what your experience was when like trying to implement that. Was it huge resistance, or was it?
In the beginning, there was some cultural resistance, and then after a while, people started trying it.
Yeah.
I experienced the same thing when we tried to stop doing water supply at every fire because most of the time we don't need it.
Yeah.
There was a huge cultural resistance, way more than with exterior attack.
Oh.
But then somebody tried it and realized, hey, this works.
Yeah.
The Lambert guy, he's not as stupid as he sounds. He's crazy, but this time he might be right.
Yeah. It's one off.
And, yeah. And little by little, people started to try it. And now I think in parts of our department, they don't do it anymore. They only use water supply when they think they'll need it, which makes them, again, way more efficient.
Yeah, I mean, Sweden never had that either because the normal has always been to do tank water. It's never been.
Yeah.
Hydrant was like a luxury, like someone later had the time to connect to a hydrant or there was a tanker showing up. That was a luxury, but tank water has always been. Like
in Brussels now, 16 years ago, there was a task which one of the guys had to do. It was very important. He had to do water supply. You couldn't even deploy a low pressure line before you had water supply.
Yeah,
so it was very strict.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And I mean, again, I like history because I think it explains a lot. When you try to teach something, if you don't understand the history, it's so much easier to teach it. But like water supply, it makes sense if you have like the crude explanation would be if you're very poor and inefficient at fighting fire, meaning you don't know very much, you're going to use a lot of water because you're wasting it. You're shooting into places where you shouldn't shoot it, and you're doing it repeatedly and so on. So you're wasting a lot of water, and when you're wasting a lot of water, you need to have a hydrant because otherwise you run out of water, and then people start jumping out of buildings, and you don't want people to jump out of buildings, so you connect to a fucking hydrant.
Yeah.
And when you get more efficient in terms of you're starting to realize if you just put the water in the right place, and especially if you put the water in the right place and the right form, you become very efficient and you don't need tank water. So I don't know if Sweden was more efficient earlier. That's why we skipped connecting to a hydrant as a first priority. It was like a second priority or a second job. Or it was, again, a victim of circumstances.
I think you were faster. You were just earlier on with the new techniques, which led to less water usage, and then you could use only tank water.
It might be. I haven't really looked into that super much, like before the 70s. Like if I go back to the 70s and I talked to a firefighter who worked in the 60s or 70s in Sweden, like, would you connect to a hydrant, like, the first thing when you arrived? I don't know, but I know. I mean, back then, like in the 70s, it was very normal to do dry chem attacks. Like that was
okay.
I mean, because again, victim of coincidence. Sweden is a fairly rural country, which means that if you have old fire trucks, they weren't fast. They were not fast. It was like an uphill. They were like crawling uphill. So it took a lot of time to, no problem. If it was uphill, I mean, it took forever for the fire truck to get there. But if you have a small fire truck without water, they were way faster. Like so if you had dry chem, it was called like sort of a SWAT team, but for firefighters. Like in the 60s, 70s, a couple of firefighters with breathing apparatus went in with a small fire truck and BAs and did interior attack with dry chem to the initial attack, and then the truck came with water and connected that and started flowing water. So that was normal until Sweden changed the regulation and said you can't do interior attack with dry chem. You have to have a hose line. That was sort of in the 80s. not no, late 70s, I think the requirement for a hose line. I don't remember, but around that. And then dry chem went away because you have to have a hose line. And by that point, trucks get a little bit better, so maybe they weren't as fast as, as slow as the old ones. And then you just accepted that you had to take a lot more time because you need a hose line and so on. So if you go back then, again, there will be even a less chance or less than that to rely on tank water. You didn't have on hydrants. You didn't even have tank water when you went inside back then. I don't know if that also contributed to the fact that that Sweden didn't rely on hydrants as much. But I have this discussion with Ed. Like I remember we had this kind of conversation a bunch of times. Like because his standard approach was the first arriving engine, secures the hydrant. Like if there's a hydrant, at least put the supply line out so that the second engine can connect it to a hydrant or something. And I say, like, why don't you go for tank water? But I think it's going to soften on that, like more tank water use and just that. And I think that's absolutely the way to go. Because if you look at it, if you can't handle with the tank water, you have a fairly substantial fire. And by then you have a lot more resources coming. Probably even if you're in a rural area, that can help you connect a hydrant or connect a tanker.
Well, for me, it's okay when they connect to a hydrant directly. If they see it's a big fire and their guess is we will not make it with tank water. Yeah. No worries there.
No, I totally agree. If you're arriving and the roof is caved in and there's a massive fire, you have no problem connecting to a hydrant. I mean, but again, like that's not the norm. The norm is you have fire blowing out of one or two windows, and that's not a problem to do on tank water in general, if like residential. So going back to so you say that going with a lay flat hose, being more aware of the surroundings is the difference that you see on the fire ground. What more would you say is difference going back compared to 10 years or 15 years ago?
Well, tactics and techniques which have become more modern, they have become more effective in extinguishing, more effective in advancing, more effective in extracting victims.
Describe that, like what kind of behaviors?
Well, for example, in extracting victims, plenty of firefighters carry a sling now, which they can wrap around the victim to drag it out. We have implemented the smoke stoppers. We have implemented the piercing nozzles. We have implemented the Cleveland hose lay. We've implemented plenty of stuff. New flashlights. We at more complex fires we have whiteboards to make a sketch and better communications. So on multiple levels there has been minor improvements, but all these minor improvements add up to a big improvement.
Would you say that there's like in Sweden there's a saying that which I now absolutely detest, but it was a saying that and it still is that like there's a new tool coming or new whatever it might be, and it said, well, it's a tool in the toolbox, and it's good to have. And now my thought is, well, there's every new tool you add, or it might be a new technique, it might be a new function, might be a new way of operating, adds complexity. Like, and I see complexity as sometimes a necessary evil today. But the complexity, I would say at least 10 years ago in Sweden and 5 years now, and still today, depending on how long you're getting to simplify again, but the complexity rose to a level that was not at all on par to whatever the interest of the firefighters to train and learn and the available time you could force people to train, basic training and ongoing training. So the complexity rose with all the complexity of building construction becoming more complex and the fires becoming more complex, and also the amount of options the firefighters have to deal with the fire grow to the point where I'm trying really hard to decrease complexity in terms of training and the firefighting operations. Do you see that you've been able to increased training and those things to meet the added complexity of adding new things to the operations?
Well, I don't think we increased the refresher training that much. We increased the basic training packages hugely, but we are in a process of trying to improve the quality of our refresher training.
Yeah.
So the annual training, the quality of it is improving.
Yeah.
And that's so you do more in the number of hours than you did before.
Yeah. Because my experience was, and I think that's shared by a lot, is that when we added more techniques, like you add a way of doing exterior attack with piercing nozzles, you added a way of doing exterior attack with dry chem, you added an exterior way of doing with Cobra or something. You added a lot more different options. If you don't have enough time to train on those very rigorously, which we don't have, you tend to go with the default option, which is interior attack. So you add a lot of new tools, but in practice, you rarely see them being used effectively because of, again, the complexity increases too much. Have you seen that as a problem?
For some of it, for example, piercing nozzles, we don't use them that much. But for example, for the smoke stopper, we're making progress steadily.
Yeah. And I mean, the smoke stopper is fairly obvious, at least in a lot of cases, especially in your case, to protect staircases and so on. It's very easy to show the dramatic difference it makes if you compare an incident to another where you use the smoke stopper in protecting the staircase. The piercing nozzle, not as much. Like it's harder to show the what if we tear the wall down and spray water there, compared to if we put a piercing nozzle in and cool it down before and then tear it out.
Yeah, I agree.
It's very much harder to prove that this seems like a viable option. So that might play a huge part. Like I said, the piercing nozzle that was invented. It was put on Swedish appliances like the fog nail in the late 80s. But it was basically only used almost only used as a fire break. Like you put it on like an attic, and you create a fire break of water, and it was just flowing, and it just drowned the building below it. So it became very unpopular because, okay, sure, you stop the fire on the attic, but you drown the building in water, because it was sort of a put it on and forget about it.
Yeah.
Then it morphed into like a precision tool where you insert it and you flow as much as needed to get like a knockdown effect before you, for instance, open it up. But that took probably 15 years to make that transition.
It all takes time.
Yeah, and now people, I would say, is sort of understand what the purpose of a piercing nozzle is. So that most of you are do a quick hit inside of a room or a void space or an attic to get temperatures down, delay the spread, build resources before you actually start opening up. And then when you open it up, you don't need as much water and you create less water damages and so on. But it's that it took a long time to build enough knowledge and experience within the whole fire service that becomes sort of accepted as let's not do the obvious thing, which is just to tear down the wall. Let's wait and have tactical patience and do things that we can't really see, but we sort of know that it's good.
Yeah.
And that is hard. And that takes a lot of time. So what are I know you need to go. So just a short remark. What are your main priorities now that you want to fix? Or what are the main, well, start two questions. What are the main priorities that you want to fix? And what are the main things that you find interesting now that I don't know which way to go?
We are working in Brussels on the level of our recruit training because we feel that there are guys who are technically competent. They have the physical abilities to become a good firefighter, but they're assholes. and they're creating problems in their respective platoons, and we want to figure out a way either to fix it or either to filter them and to kick them out.
Yeah.
Because their character doesn't fit the fire service.
Yeah.
They could be because they're assholes. It could be because they have a psychological problem. But we have to do something with this. That's one of my priorities for the moment. And then the other is leadership. I think one of the reasons why changes go that slow is because we lack good leadership. So I want to think about how can we improve leadership, and that's a topic where I spend a lot of time. But I'm still searching.
It's still interesting. I see you see this gradual. You start being focused on gear, then you go to knowledge, and you sort of end up everywhere going like culture, leadership. Like most people go that way because they like that's the root problem, which is interesting. Well, it is. I mean, it is. It goes back to leadership and like culture. So what are the areas that I think it's tied to that one, where you go like, I don't really understand this, or try to figure it out which way to go in terms of firefighting. What do you think are the most interesting topics right now?
In firefighting?
Yeah. Something you feel like, I don't know, should we go this route or this route? Or do you think you figured it out?
No, I'm just, I said it before, there are only 24 hours in a day.
Yeah.
And I've evolved the past year or two more to a management job.
Yeah.
And besides that, there is that leadership question that keeps on bugging me.
Yeah.
So for the recruits, it's the human part, and that's now my interests. And the firefighting will have to wait a little bit.
Okay. In terms of droplet size and where the droplets go.
My brain capacity is taken by something else, by some another topic.
Oh, well, if you create a framework for other people to deal with that matter, you're going to solve it that way. It's the art of delegation as a leadership. It's like the art of organization.
Yeah.
Okay, I know you need to go to your son and make some food, which is it's a very prioritized work, so I think you should do that. And I need to prepare also. My son is coming home for a while, and we got to go play.
Okay.
So, but it was awesome talking to you, Karel. I think we're going to do it again.
Yeah, great. Good chat.
Yeah. And all of us.
Hopefully we meet in the next IFIW, whenever and wherever that's going to be.
Yeah, I hope they can fix that problem.
See ya.
Yeah,
bye.